Story 1. At my school, the weird kid was this guy who used to bring a pet lizard in his pocket every single day. He wasn't sneaky about it either. He'd pull it out in the middle of class and just casually let it relax on his desk. He also talked to it like it was a person, and once told everyone the lizard gave him advice on life. Honestly, it was kind of iconic, but at the time, everyone just thought it was super weird. Story 2. He was obese with greasy hair and body odor. He was smart but eccentric. Years later, we got in touch through Facebook, and he told me how difficult things had been in school, growing up with no father and a mentally ill mother. That's a lesson to learn. Sometimes the odd kid seems odd because they are doing their best to try and live in a bad situation. Story 3. The vine where a kid goes, "I have the power of God and anime on my side," and screams like a banshee went to my middle school. He was maybe 4 grades beneath me, but his weirdness turned him into one of the most popular kids in his grade. Story 4. Adam was just weird, kind of dumb, and just weird. I remember at grade 8 graduation, I met his dad and thought, wow, I've never known a kid to look so exactly like his dad before. Then I met his mother and realized he looked exactly like her, too. Story 5. I befriended the weird kid because I felt sorry for him being bullied. We spent so many hours together over the years. I still have no idea what makes him so super weird. Story 6. This was in elementary school. She loved to draw wolves. She was so talented. I would sit with her at times and watch her draw during our breaks. Kids were not kind to her and made fun of her for it. Story 7. The kid smelled like he bathed in cat pee every day. He hissed at anyone who came near him. He used to run through the hallways from class to class. He threatened to kill me in a computer lab because I used Internet Explorer instead of Firefox. Story 8. For the school-wide talent show, he put a plastic bag on the back of his head, on which he had hastily scribbled something resembling a smiley face. He faced away from the audience and touched his hands behind his back. That was his talent. Touching his hands behind his back. Story 9. Weird in a good way, really. He was simply too smart. In a high school with many smart kids, suburban high school in a wealthy area with 99% going to college and lots of kids going to Ivy League schools and high academic public universities, he still stood way above us. I looked him up not too long ago as we were talking. Whatever happened to him? Not a surprise, I guess. He is involved in deep space research. He has a couple of fellowships and writes papers about topics that I can't even understand from the titles. Story 10. There was this girl a few years older than me who thought she was a werewolf, among other things. As you can imagine, a lot of kids made fun of her. She was a sweetheart once you got to know her, though. I'm not an expert, but I always wondered if she went through some super traumatic event when she was little that triggered some of her behaviors. Story 11. Not really a feel-good or misunderstood kid story, but here goes. A kid at my school who was just a mix of abrasive and socially awkward. It was really hard to talk to him because he would easily misunderstand your intentions and then get super hostile really quickly until you'd leave him alone. He quickly made enemies of pretty much every clique at school, even though most groups were pretty welcoming and accepting from my experience. I saw how he acted towards most other kids, so I largely tried to avoid him just because I wasn't into drama. Groups of kids started to intentionally tease him about random stuff just because they knew it was easy to get a reaction out of him. I would say it was kind of bullying, but he honestly didn't do himself any favors considering how many people I saw try and be his friend that he would berate and demean for random things until they didn't like him anymore. By high school, everyone had to do volunteer work, and he decided to do after-school care for elementary. Some students picked on him and called him a pedophile, and he would obviously get really upset about it. I still never really talked to him much, but I did feel for him at the time because there is a real big stigma around men working with kids, and I thought it was commendable that he powered through it until a year after high school when he was convicted as a child predator. No one that I knew really made those accusations with any real basis beyond trying to get him upset, and everyone was horrified to learn that they were actually right on the money. To find out it was all happening at my old daycare made me absolutely sick. Story 12. There was a kid in my school who was obsessed with Mario. He had Mario sweatshirts and notebooks and a Mario backpack. Well, someone figured out that if you told him Mario is dead, he'd flip. Scream and cry, no he's not every time. He got in trouble multiple times for attacking kids who said anything about Mario dying, even if they were talking about in the context of Super Smash Bros. Or something. This happened in 8th to 10th grade. Then, I never saw him again. Story 13. When I was a freshman in high school, there was this kid I sat next to in math class. On several occasions, he brought handcuffs to class. He also had made a hit list of everyone in the school he despised. I don't recall being on the list, but I do remember being told by a friend that he said he would chop me into pieces and stuff me into his trunk. Story 14. He responded to everything with, "I know you are, but what am I?" regardless of what was said. Eventually, people just stopped trying to talk to him. I remember seeing him sitting alone and asking if he wanted to sit with us. And he replied, "I know you are, but what am I?" I said, "Yeah, but do you want to come join us?" "I know you are, but what am I?" "I'm being serious. Come join us." "I know you are, but what am I?" "Okay, never mind." "I know you are, but what am I?" Story 15. Well, for one, he stockpiled an entire desk full of spoons from the lunch cafeteria over the course of several months, all clean. Then one day they all fell out. He was strange, but pretty harmless. Story 16. We had a couple. One thought he was a vampire. He wore a cape, fangs, dressed in black, the whole thing. Kept it up throughout high school. I don't know what happened to him. The other was a German exchange student who looked like a Hanson brother. He was just odd. I don't think it was that he was foreign. It's that he just had really dated clothes and generally acted awkward. Looking back, he was a nice kid, but it was likely autism. Story 17. Autism plus growing up in a cult equals high. I had serious social issues. I'm well on my way to being old and still weird. Not in a cult though. Left that behind decades ago. Can I talk to you for several hours about native plants, textile arts, cults, or one of my other special interests? Laugh out loud. Story 18. Made a point to learn everyone's name, so even if they hadn't met each other or were total strangers, he could walk up to them and greet them by name. This is harmless compared to him getting caught masturbating under his desk during math class. Story 19. We had a person who wet himself while being in grade 6 or 7 on several occasions, at least once a month. He was the picture book oddball. He had big teeth, glasses, always looked like he was focusing on something up close, slightly drooling, very short curly hair, lanky as can be, and usually taller than most teachers. I really felt bad for that guy because he was also mostly nonverbal from what I heard and, as you can guess, hadn't had many friends, if any at all. Story 20. My undiagnosed autism. The second weirdest kid was my friend Chris. His family were born-again Christians who went around schools to preach the Bible. His brother was the star of the show, as an ex-drug user who saw Jesus one day, while on drugs, and was saved. For your information, in England we're not very religious, so this kind of thing is odd to us. Chris was just bizarre as a person. He always seemed to be trying to joke, but went too far to a point where it just wasn't funny. He'd pretend to see things and throw things at them. He'd annoy the hell out of most people. One day I couldn't find him anywhere, and I noticed everyone staring at me in a really weird way. Someone sheepishly took me aside to tell me everyone was scared of me because of what Chris had done. It turned out he'd horrifically disfigured a Chinese exchange student by stabbing him in the face repeatedly with a butter knife from the canteen during the first break. And those knives were blunt, so it must have taken a lot of force. Looking back, I'm pretty certain he was schizophrenic. Story 21. I was the weird one. Someone once referred to me as the cat girl with the socks. I wore cat ears and thigh-high socks to school almost every day. Story 22. Man, almost 40 years later, this still bothers me. His name was Stuart, and he was the school outcast. Possibly on the autism spectrum, which wasn't really recognized back then. And for some reason, everyone picked on him. To be fair, I tried to reach out a couple of times, and he wasn't interested. Perhaps after a short lifetime of being picked on, he was wary of anyone appearing friendly. We came back from Christmas break to the news that on Christmas Eve, as his parents walked through the door, he put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I know there was more to the story, and that we were all just kids, but there were times I was unkind to him, and I still feel bad about it. The whole thing haunts me to this day. Story 23. There was a homely guy in middle school whom the kids used to bully. Something happened to his neck, and for a while, he walked around the hallways with his right ear close to his right shoulder. Between classes, all the kids en route to their next class would imitate him, heads leaning to the right side. It was so obnoxious. He was a nice kid. Story 24. I was voted weirdest girl in my high school's yearbook. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but I've been having some problems in my adulthood, and I'm quite certain I grew up in domestic violence. I'm a 35-year-old woman and still scared of my dad. Story 25. One of them thought he was in a cartoon or an anime or something. He would make exaggerated movements while dramatically reciting the name or catchphrase of the said move. Story 26. One kid loved trains and drew them regularly. He was incredibly talented with regard to the drawings. They were incredibly detailed, but it was all he ever talked about. Another kid loved being called Booger and dated the girl who wet her pants in a couple of classes. They enjoyed public shows of affection. Story 27. Had a kid that would soil his pants all the time and seemed to get pleasure out of it. Always asked people if they wanted to see it. Very weird, but I imagine there are many mental issues that could be involved. Story 28. He drew an M on his forehead and ran around the school pretending to be Majin Buu from Dragon Ball Z. He was later caught trying to steal one of the school's chickens. Story 29. In third grade, he would casually pee his pants. The teacher had a giant stack of his pants in her closet. She would just give him a new pair, and he would change like nothing happened. Story 30. She would run down the hallways screaming like a pterodactyl at random times, for no reason. 1 second she would be walking like a normal person, the next running and screaming. She would also kick doors open and sometimes scream in class. She would also sometimes say things that were borderline disturbing, usually some dark history fact she knew offhand or some strange random animal fact. We were friends, haha. Honestly, she was fine when she wasn't acting out. Since we all graduated, she went through a stage of saying she was non-binary and changed her name and everything. Now she claims that she was brainwashed to believe that and is now back to identifying as a woman and is vehemently anti-trans, anti-vaccine, and doesn't believe in COVID-19. She spreads a whole lot of conspiracy theories and thinks Trump has good points. We are no longer friends. I could handle pterodactyl screaming, but that was too far. Story 31. He loved Doctor Who so much that he dressed up and spoke like the Fourth Doctor. This was before anyone knew what Doctor Who was, and 80% of us were Mexican-American, including him. Story 32. He used to sit beside me in class and masturbate. He had a lot of trouble socializing and fitting in, and then one year he came back to school and he was normal. No more masturbating, sleeping in class, and he started dating a cheerleader. Story 33. I was the weird kid at my Catholic elementary school for being interested in art. I'm still not really sure why they were hung up on that, especially considering my dad went to prison at the time. Story 34. So, I have a great story. We had a bit of a weird kid we called Storyteller. He was always making up stories that were really far-fetched, but he swore they were all true. This was in the 1990s. For example, his dad was a German spy, and he himself, at 14, was already working on some classified computer stuff that he couldn't talk about. Also, he was dating a German model, and so on. Well, a few years ago, I randomly moved in across the street from him. He's fully retired from a cushy information technology job when he was like 45, and he's married to a beautiful German woman. Story 35. His sophomore year, he would run around as if he was from Naruto. The anime with a Leaf Village headband on and everything, arms back, full-on sprinting headfirst. Then his junior year, he swore he was T.I., walking through the hallways singing "Big Things Poppin', Little Things Stoppin'." And no, he did not rap more lyrics. I'm certain those were the only lyrics he knew to the song. Story 36. In the days before we had a word for autism, there was a kid with an imaginary friend that was a light bulb. I mean, it was a real light bulb. Apparently, one day he plugged it back into his lamp, kissed it goodnight, and horribly burned his lips, leaving him permanently scarred. He's over 40 now and doing okay. He has a girlfriend who is also on the spectrum, and they make art. So, a happy ending? Maybe. Story 37. I moved around a lot, and these people were drawn to me sometimes. Almost all of the time, it was because they were autistic, queer, dealing with mental health issues, or had a difficult home life that expressed itself in ways most people couldn't relate to. I was also one of them. Of all the unique kids that come to mind, very few of them deserve to be outcasts and were dealing with bullying in some regard. Story 38. In grade 6, the weird kid went out to the sand pits in the schoolyard that were meant for long jump during gym class, and he started digging in them like a dog would. People made up rumors that they saw him pee in the holes as well, but I don't think it's true. In grade 9, there was a different weird kid who we all called Slick Rick, because he would slick back his hair with gel. He had a collection of rocks that he said were dragon eggs. One time during lunch, my friends and I were sitting in the hallway having lunch, and he came up to us and said to sit still because it was going to jump over our heads. We told him no, but he continued to harass us. It wasn't until we resorted to bullying that he would leave us alone. I'm not proud of that moment since he obviously was lonely and wanted to perhaps have lunch with us. But he made us all feel uncomfortable. There was another weird kid in middle school who was just quiet and sat alone a lot. I was nice to him, which resulted in him having a crush on me and asking me out. I declined, and then he avoided me. The same thing happened to me in college. Pretty awkward.